Can the general unmute, please?
So can I request General Mohinder to address us?
Sir, you're okay, fine
now. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Avinash, for the wonderful introduction. It reminds me of our days together in India many decades ago, and our catching up 9 years back during the course reunion and celebration of a golden jubilee. I'd also like to thank Rotarian Sudhir Seth, who's the club president, and Rotarian Lalit Vashisht, the club secretary, for giving me this honor of speaking to you today on a very auspicious occasion. It is 22 years, more or less, to the date when we were fighting in the hills of Kargil, in the mountains of Kargil. And it's a very memorable to be talking to you, to be speaking to you today, this evening. I'll also like to extend my greetings. I believe General Harsh Ganguly and General Datta and Colonel Chaudhary are here. They are distinguished veterans, and my sincere greetings to them. Now, coming to the topic of victory in Kargil, I must give you a brief background as to how this problem came about in May, June 1999. If you recall, we had gone through the process of nuclearizing the country in May 98, followed immediately by Pakistan also exploding their nuclear devices. So the two countries were more or less declared nuclear states, and that gave a bit of complacency, I would think, because with the nuclear status of both the countries, the assessment was that the threat to national security would reduce considerably, particularly in conventional operations. And following this up, our Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee, visited Lahore and signed the Lahore Declaration in February 1999. Now, at that time, the Pakistan military had already started their operation to intrude into areas across the line of control, capture those areas, settle down, and then sort of wait for our response and reaction. My division, the 8th Mountain Division, was deployed in Sharifabad, which is on the bypass to Gulmarg and Baramulla from Srinagar. And we were mainly in the counterinsurgency role. Now, I had been in command for a little over a year, and we had brought the situation fairly under control. And it seemed that we had the upper hand as far as the insurgency in the valley was concerned. Normalcy had been restored with the elections being held earlier. So everything seemed to be quite normal as far as the valley was concerned. However, sometimes in the first week of May, we were the local battalion headquarters informed the corps headquarters through proper channels that a local grazier, a shepherd, had seen some suspicious movement on the hills in the Batalik sector. Now, Avinash, can I request for that that map, please, so that I can just give an idea of what the terrain was, what the area was like.
Lalit,
Yes.
Can we have the map, please?
Yeah, no, if you see, this is the divisions which are there in J&K. One is the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, which we call POK. Then is the Aksai Chin, which has been again occupied by the Chinese over a period of time prior to 1962. And the line of control which is running from which is marked in purple. This line, which is marked in purple, is the line of actual control, and the line of control, that is the demarcation between India and Pakistan following the 1971 war and the Karachi Agreement, runs for about 740 kilometers. And thereafter, you have the actual ground position line, which is another 110 kilometers to a point called NJ9842. You must have heard this point coming very often as far as J&K is concerned. Now, thereafter, the description of the line from NJ9842 is what is in contention between us and Pakistan. Then you have the line of actual control with China, which runs for 520 kilometers. So this is as far as the general geography of the place is concerned. The road, you have Srinagar, which is the capital of the erstwhile state J&K, and now, of course, is the UT. And from there, the road goes through the Zujila Pass eastwards, and then it goes to Dras, and thence on to Kargil and Leh. Can I have the second slide, please? Yeah. Before I get on to this, let me just tell you that how this situation developed. So in the first week of May, like I was mentioning, the suspicious movement was reported. Patrols were sent out, and you must have heard of that patrol led by Lieutenant Saurabh Kalia, whose body was mutilated beyond recognition and handed over back to us sometimes in the end of May. Now, this is what triggered the real operation, and because all the time the Pakistanis were saying these are the militants who come and occupied this, while we were saying, well, our intelligence was fairly poor at that stage, and we were not even sure whether they were the militants or the Mujahideen. Nevertheless, as the time passed and as our intelligence gave us further information, we realized that these were the actual Pakistan North Light Infantry, which was deployed in this area. Now, why would Pakistan have done this sort of an action? Pakistan realized sometimes in 98-99 that we had the upper hand as far as the insurgency in J&K was concerned. And therefore, they were losing their grip in the valley. Normalcy was being returned. And normal life was what the locals also wanted, was in progress. And then it was, they realized that they needed to sort of open up a fresh front. And this is a good opportunity. They found this to be a good opportunity of exploiting large gaps which existed between the defenses of India and Pakistan and our own defenses. Now, the line of control which runs in this sector is eyeball to eyeball confrontation most of the places, except for areas where there is no communication or a network connecting both the sides. And also, over a period of time since independence, there was a general informal understanding that during the winter months, we would withdraw, and the winter posts, the posts which are on extreme high altitude and which were untenable during the snow period, we would withdraw and come back to the lower heights and reoccupy them once the snow melts. So this was the broad understanding between the two armies, and over a period of time, everything was fine till in 1999, we realized that they have violated this understanding and come and occupied our posts, which had been vacated during the snow period, over a frontage of approximately 130 kilometers. Now, that's a very, very large frontage. And there were numerous posts of the Pakistani which had intruded across the line of control and come onto our side in the Kargil, in the Dras sector, Kargil sector, Batalik, and Yaldor sector, which is more to the east of Kargil. So this was the situation sometimes in the middle of May that we realized that it's very difficult for the troops which are already deployed in that area to respond and restore the sanctity of the line of control. And a decision was then taken to upstick 8th Mountain Division and move it across Zujila Pass and then give it the task of restoring the sanctity of the line of control as soon as possible, of course, time permitting and the weather permitting. Now, the second aim of Pakistan was to internationalize the J&K issue. And I think they were quite successful in this because the Americans got into it and the European Union got into it and all the big powers got into the effort in bringing about a ceasefire. Of course, it was on our terms and we accepted the ceasefire at the end of July. So this was the general sort of scenario or the situation when 8th Mountain Division was called to restore the situation east of Kargil in the Dras and the Mhow areas. Now, I'll just tell you what is the geography of that area. Now, can I have that slide, please? Those 3 slides which depict the area. Now, you notice this is the type of terrain in which we were operating. There were vertical cliffs, absolutely non-negotiable at places. And if we had to climb these, which we did at night in one of the attacks with the help of ropes. So this was the type of vertical cliffs which we faced. The next slide, please. Can I have the next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was no vegetation. Now, with the result, the area was devoid of all vegetation, which made movement very difficult. Then, which made movement very difficult. It made movement very tiresome, and to operate in high altitudes with more or less every step which you take, you went down 2 steps. It was very difficult, and the troops had to face a lot of hardships initially before we got our act together and responded to this intrusion by Pakistan. Yeah, the next slide, please. And this is the type of terrain which I was talking about, the loose earth. You take 1 step up and you slip down 2 steps. So it's very difficult. Movement became very cumbersome, very difficult. And just imagine the soldier going in for an attack uphill. This was all uphill. The operations were all uphill, and with a weight about 30 kgs, 20 to 30 kgs on his back, including ammunition. So it was a very difficult task to negotiate this rugged terrain, inclement weather, and of course the enemy sitting on these dominating heights. This was the area where all the action took place as far as 8th Mountain Division was concerned. You see the road which is going from a place which you can identify as Batayan to Dras, and it goes to Kaksar, Kargil, and then on to Leh. Now, Dras and Mhow were the 2 areas which for which I was made responsible. And this was the area where the initial major fight was taking place. Now, there's a feature called Tonaling Heights, which you can see just below the red line in more or less the center of the screen. Now, Tonaling Heights was the feature which was occupied by the Pakistanis in a fair amount of strength. And this was about 7 to 8 kilometers. The penetration was 7 to 8 kilometers across the line of control into our area. And from here, he could interdict the national highway, which was running from Srinagar, Zujila, Batayan, Dras, Kargil, and thence on to Leh. Now, this is also the highway which is used for the winter stocking of the troops in this area, which and also the local garrison in Leh, the civilian garrison in Leh. So everything is moved on this national highway, right from wall-like stores to non-wall-like stores, right from salt, sugar upwards to guns and ammunition. So the whole administrative chain is concentrating on this winter stocking. Now, in the middle of May, when the Pakistanis opened fire on us, and the movement on this road was totally interdicted. Our civil traffic couldn't move. The winter stocking was getting delayed, and it was again something which it was any military traffic was also getting shot at by the observed artillery fire and direct fire from the Toleling heights. So this was a major sort of a feature which they had captured, and it was quite a dominating feature in that area, which made our existence in this place very difficult. So my division was given the task of assuming the operational responsibility of Dras and Mashko on the 1st of June. That means about 3 weeks had passed by the time the decision had been taken to induct the division. Thank you, please. I don't think we'll get the map now. Thank you. Yeah. So this was the terrain, the weather, and now the enemy was sitting on the dominating heights all over across a frontage of 130 kilometers. Though in the Dras, Mashko, the area was less, it was about 50-60 kilometers, but nevertheless, they were sitting on heights across this frontage of 130 kilometers. This was difficult for any form of attack to be successful. It required guts and, with all the josh which was required to make sure that the operation against these heights would succeed. So the initial, before my division came, there was, things had not been very stabilized. And when I came on June 1st, I requested that I be given adequate time to prepare for the operation, and there should be no unnecessary, there shouldn't be any pressure on me to start the operation or to hasten up the operation. And I think the authorities, the higher headquarters were very supportive of this requirement. And I was given the complete wherewithal, whatever I asked for. And I used this time really to build up the artillery in this area and to build up the ammunition in this area, and also to acclimatize my troops who were coming from the valley. Now, we were operating in the valley at heights ranging from 6,000 to 9,000 feet. And here we were confronted with the average valley height of about 10,000 to 11,000 feet, with the operating heights at which the attacks were being launched were over 14,000 to 15,000 feet. So a second stage of acclimatization was required. People had to get sort of oriented to the conventional war, that is from the counterinsurgency operations to transit into a conventional into a conventional role. It takes time to sort of reorientate the troops. So about 10-11 days, we shortened our procedures, and we were ready by about 12th of June to launch our first attack. And the first attack had to be on Toleling, because Toleling was the feature which was creating the biggest problem for us and was interdicting us. Night movement was only possible, and the whole highway was more or less, where before before Toleling, the vehicles were all stranded on the road because of its inability to move, their inability to move. So the artillery and all was inducted, and finally we launched our first operation with 2 Rajputana rifles under a very, very gallant commanding officer, Colonel Ravi Ravindranath. He is no more. We lost him about 3-4 years back due to a cardiac arrest, but an extremely competent officer. Along with them were the other battalion, 18 grenadiers, which was providing the firm base, 13 Jack which had to go for a subsequent operation, and 18 Garhwal. So this complete operation was launched on the 12th of June. And on the 13th of June, we managed to capture this formidable objective with very heavy casualties and Tololing, but finally we got hold of Tololing and were able to open the road to Leh. Now the attack on Tololing and the success of Tololing was really the turning point of the Kargil war. And just to recollect for you, this was 13th of June. We were just a couple of days into the war, but this helped us. It gave us the confidence. It gave us a great deal of intelligence of how and the methodology which we should follow for our subsequent operations. And from here, really, the operations were all, ridge hopping from one ridge to another till finally we cleared up the whole area. But I must mention a couple of good actions over here. This .5140 was an extension of Tololing to the height 5140, which is about 18,000 feet. Now, this was the 13 Jacrif was given this task, and 13 Jammu and Kashmir rifles. They were commanded by a very enterprising and a very gallant young commanding officer, who's the army commander now, Northern Command at Udhampur. He led the operation right from the front. He got his Veer Chakra, and he captured 5140 on the 19th of June. That is, it took about a week to sort of reorganize ourselves and be ready for the next phase of the operation. And this is where Vikram Batra, whose biopic is being, Mr. Seth had mentioned, is being released today, used the famous phrase, "Ye dil mange Mhow," as a success signal to his commanding officer that he had captured the objective. So this was the battle at .5140, and from there we went to various heights, and finally we had to negotiate Tiger Hill. Now, Tiger Hill was again a very critical battle because it was a very, very dominating height, and 18 grenadiers was tasked for this, and they did a commendable job in finally capturing Tiger Hill on the 5th of July in the morning. Now, this is where Grenadier Yoginder Singh Yadav earned his Paramveer Chakra. Now, when he was in the commando platoon, what we call the Ghatak platoon of the battalion, and they were assaulting this feature. Sometimes in the early hours of the morning, they reached the top. Now, when they reached the top, they thought they had captured the objective. But it was a cloudy morning, and there was another feature just echelon behind this, and where the enemy was still present. And from there, he came and he shot about 7 of our soldiers, killed them. And Yoginder Singh was wounded with 7 bullet injuries. And despite that, he fought back. He managed to kill about 4 or 5 of the enemy. And he refused to be evacuated. And he said, till the feature is not cleared up, I will refuse to be evacuated. And after the clearance of the objective, he was evacuated, where he was later on awarded with the Paramveer Chakra, which is, as mentioned by Mr. Seth, is the highest award gallantry in the country. From there, we went to another very dominating feature called .4875. And this is where Vikram Batra got his Paramveer Chakra, and again, a very, very courageous and a brave operation. And along with him, there was Sanjay Kumar, who from the same battalion were awarded 2 Paramveer Chakras. And this was Colonel Joshi's battalion, who's now, I mentioned, the Northern Army commander. So it's a commendable operation by these battalions. And I think we need to be very proud of our young officers and men and the army who, despite such great odds, managed to sort of bring the defeat into victory. And that also at a very, very high cost and a high price. My assessment of the whole situation was that we have one of the best armies, I think, in the world, with these young officers who just said, "Follow me," and everyone and their rank and file just followed them wherever they led them. Just one word of command, "Follow me," and they had the whole subunit following them for this arduous task. It is not easy to go uphill at 16,000, 17,000 feet with the fire coming down at you, aimed fire coming at you, and then sort of assaulting and capturing. I think it is sheer guts and bravery which these young officers showed. And I think the whole country needs to be proud of the type of army which we field and the type of army which we have. I think it's highly commendable. And also along with this, I think we need to salute the families of these martyrs who have lived these past 22 years. And I must say, with a lot of pride and a lot of dignity in their lives, they brought up their children very well. And I'd also like to give you an example. There was a like Bachan Singh, who was martyred in the capture of Tolaling in the beginning of the war. And his wife, she had twin sons. So she brought up these boys in the best way she could possibly, with all the help from everyone. And today, one of the boys is a commissioned officer in his father's battalion. So that is the type of determination which our families of the martyrs have also shown. It is something highly commendable, and I think we need to salute the families as much as we salute the martyrs. I think it's a great, it's a very motivating factor for the army. I think that's about all. I think finally, when we ended the operation on 26 July, there was a feeling of relief and joy. But of course, the sadness, like it was mentioned, to have lost 268 officers and men is a very high number. Though we were compensated with the honors and awards, but I think loss of lives is something which which plays on your mind throughout your life. And while 268 was the casualty figure in my division, overall we lost 527. That is in the entire war. So that's a very, very high casualty rate, and it speaks volumes for the courage and determination shown by our officers and men. And once again, may I extend my grateful thanks to the Rotary Club Mumbai Sea Coast for having given me this opportunity to speak to you. And like Avinash has said, we go back a long time, and our dear friend Ballu is not here. I remember him with a lot of good sentiments and good memories which we have of him from our NDA days and later on over a period of time whenever we came into contact with him. Thank you very much, Mr. Seth and Mr. Vishist, for giving me this opportunity, and Avinash for doing all the extraordinary work in introducing me to speak to you this evening. Thank you very much.
So, sir, can we have some questions?
Definitely, definitely.
So, sir, I would like to ask a question that would you say this was an intelligence failure?
Yes, I think it's no national secret. It was definitely an intelligence failure. And it was an intelligence failure of all agencies, including the military, including our troops who were in contact with the, who was deployed on the ground, for their failure to really carry out the desired surveillance when the posts were vacated from these heights. It was a failure, and I think that has been well recognized, well acknowledged, and adequate measures have now been taken to ensure that we don't fall into this trap again.
Sir, what was the number of casualties on their side?
You know, Pakistan, no enemy really wants to declare the type of casualties or the number of casualties. But I think from the intercepts which we could gather, they had about 1,100 killed. But the tragic part of it is that they failed to recognize or give any dignity and honor to their dead. My division, we buried 140 of their soldiers with all religious ceremonies. We had our Maulvis there. We had the Pakistani flag in which we laid the bodies. And I think we gave enough dignity to the soldier who was our enemy at one point of time, but who was also a man in uniform. But the Pakistanis, regrettably, didn't honor their dead, which is
General, what was the role of the Indian Air Force in this particular episode?
yeah, Indian Air Force played a very, very important role. See, the Indian Army and the Indian Army and the Indian Army and the Air Force.
Somebody's echo.
Yeah, some disturbance. The
Mute
Indian
kar do
Army,
yaar.
Everyone.
yeah, the Indian Army and the Air Force both had a very difficult task. We were inducted into battle at heights which was the highest the world has ever seen, where pitched battles have been fought. So while we were not very acclimatized and very well trained for such extreme high altitudes, neither was the Air Force in engaging targets at that altitude. They didn't have the right type of ordnance, they didn't have the right type of weaponry. So, but nevertheless, when they went into the operation, they took some time, but later on, they had their restrictions because the terms of reference given that you can't cross the line of control was a very major restricting power for the air, restricting the factor as far as the employment of Air Force is concerned. But they were very supportive, and I think it was a big morale booster for us. And since the Pakistani Air Force was nowhere in sight, it degraded their morale to a very large extent. So I think the Air Force played its part extremely well.
Can I have a question? What is the role of Israel during the Kargil war? There we've heard such rumors that Israel was involved with some sort of intelligence in the midst of the war. And the second question I'll cheat and ask you too is that if you had been given the permission to go across the LOC, how much better would it be? In retrospect, do you think our government should have allowed the army to go and cross the LOC and surround them?
Yeah, I think your second question is more relevant to us than the first question, and therefore I'll answer it first. Crossing the line of control was again a very strict term of reference which was given to us, and it did hinder the operations of the army as well as the Air Force. And it was something which we had to sort of live with. Had we been given the opportunity to go across the line of control, we could have, changed our strategy, we could have changed our tactics, and perhaps when we were progressing the operation, we could have got them into our net in a much better sort of way, and we could have speeded up the operation. But I think this term of reference definitely was something which was hurting the operational conduct of the war. And now, as far as Israel is concerned, but then these are, I'm talking from the field, what the politician, what the leadership, political leadership thinks. They're looking at a much larger canvas, and I think they must have had very good reasons to lay down this term of reference. And if you remember, we did get a lot of good brownie points from the international community for not enlarging the scope of the operation and restricting it only to the Kargil area. Now, as far as the Israelis are concerned, I am sorry, I don't have any definite information, and but definitely we were helped in the supply of ammunition, which was very heavy as far as we were concerned, and they did help us in our immediate supply of ammunition. And there was also a talk that in intelligence also that there was a certain amount of assistance which was given to us, but I am not very sure of this, and therefore I wouldn't like to comment on it.
I would like to say that General
Yes,
Malu's wife, Renu, is very much here present.
hi, Renu, how are you?
Yeah, Renu Malhotra. Malu's
Renu
wife.
will just sent a message to you, Mohinder.
Can we focus on Renu, Lalit?
Renu, if she can switch on her video. Can we see Renu? She just sent a hello message to General. She just wrote. Yeah. Yeah.
There
Hi,
is
Renu.
Hi, Renu.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Mohinder. It was really a pleasure to hear you.
Good to be speaking to you and seeing you after last 9 years when we met.
Yeah. No, many more. Today, actually, it's been 14 years since Vijay passed away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we remember it with a lot of love.
Yeah. Yeah, good times in the army. Yeah.
Yes.
Where are you? You're based out of Delhi now?
No, I'm in Gurgaon.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
बम्बई वालों को सब दिल्ली होता है, गुड़गांव से दिल्ली.
Yeah,
it's a
for
part
us,
of,
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to
we
see
like,
you,
we like to
Renu.
retain our identity, I suppose.
Thanks you joined, Renu. Very happy to see you today.
No, of course. And it was really insightful also because Vijay had his problem when he was climbing the ice wall in Ladakh, in the Kargil, in Sechin.
Yes.
So it brought out a lot of that also. Yes. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Renu.
Okay.
Okay, all the best. Take care.
I have one more question. I believe we had prisoners of war also, and one of our Air Force pilot was also captured by them. Would you like to share some insights into both in terms of how our pilot was treated and the protocol that we do with respect to the guys we captured?
See, I can tell you as far as treatment of their prisoners with us is concerned, it was on a very humanitarian basis. We never patched them up, right? The orders were very strict as far as this is concerned, that no prisoner will be maltreated or, like the way sort of Kalia was. And they will be treated with a lot of, follow the Geneva Conventions. About Nikita, the pilot who was captured, I have very little information except what came in the media. I've never had an opportunity to speak to him over a period of time. And what came in the media is what I can share with you, that he was given a bit of a rough treatment, which I suppose is a part of the game. But as far as we were concerned, I think we maintained, as I like to believe that we maintained, and I'm sure we did, because I didn't get any adverse reports on this from the forward troops. We did treat our prisoners, their prisoners well, and well, that is all there is to it. You follow the Geneva Conventions and everything was all right.
Good evening, General Mohinder Puri. I have a question. You have worked under Congress regime as well as BJP regime. And in connection with Pakistan and military, who is the better regime?
I don't want to get into a political. I think the army remains out of politics. So whichever the government is in power, the army is supposed to do what is desired from them. What is the task given, whether it is Congress, whether it is BJP, hamara kaam hai ki we have to do the task which is allotted. And it's, you know, the army should be just kept out of all this politics, if you don't mind.
I think there is only one answer to that, if I might, on your behalf. They're doing their swadharma, service before self. That's it, period.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So if there are no more questions, I would request. Any more questions?
Yeah, I have one question.
Having a lot of questions, but please decide of the time.
Sir, yes, I have the question that, you know, why do we play such a fair and square game when they have already mistreated our officers and men so badly and surprised us by the misunderstanding? We had to go all the way to, you know, treat them in such a good way. And I don't know why we always try and project this goodwill and good image where the other person is already known to be bad. We can always be worse and eat ka jawab patthar se de sakte hain.
See, that is why the army has got the respect which their army doesn't have. I think I think that is the reason why we carry a lot of respect. We are respected as an army more than what any other army would. And two wrongs don't make a right in any case. So if one side is hurt, the other side doesn't have to hurt. You have to follow your training teaches you to follow the conventions or the international conventions or like the Geneva Convention, which lays down how the prisoners of war should be treated. And just let me quote to you, in 1971, after the war, we had 93,000 prisoners in various camps. And there was not a single case where any of the prisoners was mistreated. See the amount of goodwill which these prisoners carried back. And the international community will recognize this. So I think this is you have to play the game in a larger context rather than worrying about उसने मेरे को मारा और मैं उसको दो थप्पड़ वापस मारूंगा. So I think that doesn't work when you come on to these things. You have to, in battle, you have to give out your best. And that is what we've done in these four wars which we fought with them. I think that is the message which we must carry home rather than worry about how the prisoners are being dealt by either side.
Okay, sir. And the role of Air Force, like you mentioned, it seems that ground forces were supported by the Air Force for this particular operation and assault, and it is in context of what CDS has recently stated, that Air Force is the supporting arm. Whereas Air Force may differ in their perceptions and in their role actually in the battle. And with the changing times, I think it is quite debatable. I don't know what is your take on it.
No, I think what the CDS was mentioning that time was that it is a supported. They are meant for supporting the army and the navy. It's not that they're a supporting arm or something like that. Their context is to support the army and the navy as a major service. You can't. I don't think anyone implies that they are not an equal service. They are absolutely an equal service as far as the army and the navy and the air force are concerned. There is no distinction in the importance which is given to any of these services. So I think it's the wrong message that we are carrying from what was mentioned and the context in which it was mentioned.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, and compliments for leading India to victory at such trying times and in arduous conditions. Hats off certainly to all the ground soldiers, but then I'm sure there must have been lots of work and toil and midnight oil burnt at your end as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I have one question?
We have time for only one more question now.
Can I?
Yes, Gautam.
Hey,
Yeah.
General Saab, Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, sir. Jai Hind.
I am Gautam Goradia. I'm been a past Rotarian, and I think I'm attending a Rotary meeting after 1998, perhaps. This may not be the very right forum to discuss this, General Saab. Maybe I'll take it up with you and the President at some other occasion. But because you mentioned the word surveillance, my company has announced a very important national service in order to recognize the great work that the Indian police, paramilitary, and defense forces have been doing. And we will hear this in good time in the days to come. Avinash knows a little bit about the work that we do. And all I can say and offer from my end is a salute to all of you. You are the real heroes, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very kind of you.
Yes, Sudhirji, let us take it forward.
Any more questions?
Dr. Kothari is asking, I'm going.
Okay. Ashok? Dr. Kothari, any questions?
You have to unmute yourself. Yes.
Hero battle over river Basanta, Colonel Vijayendra Malhotra was with us. He was a live wire, and we honored him with Shaktiman Award 20 years back. That time, Army had sent a band also, military band. And when we had our one Mahotsav, Major General D'Souza asked us to plant a tree in memory of Vijayant Upper, of also hero of Kargil. He got Mahavir Chakra. So we planted, and it is growing well.
There are many stories related to Kargil and its activity. Okay.
A small question, if you can permit me.
Yes, okay, all right. One last question, okay, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I'm Colonel Mehdi. I was there with General. I would just like to request him, in case he can throw some light on the role of artillery during the operations.
Yeah, hi, Mehdi. How are you? Good to see you.
Hey, fine, sir. I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, the artillery, I think, was a battle winning factor as far as, I think my camera seems to have gone off. Just a minute. Yeah, the artillery was a battle winning factor, undoubtedly. And they helped us, supported the infantry attacks in a very, very commendable way. We used the Bofors gun to improvise the use of the Bofors gun in a very big way. And instead of, as you know, the artillery is an indirect weapon, that means you don't see the target end. But here we used it in a direct role with devastating effect on the enemy. So I think the artillery was undoubtedly a battle winning factor. And I hope you are satisfied with that.
More than that, seeing you. More than that, seeing you, sir.
Sorry?
More than that, I'm more satisfied. Seeing you, interacting with you, it is a pleasure for me, sir, after a long time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So may I request our past president, Jayanti Bhai, he's always ready with a char-liner on every occasion. So I would request him to do the char-liner on this occasion. Jayanti.
Sure. Good evening, friends. My line goes this way. तिरंगा लहरा के आऊंगा या खुद उसमें लिपट जाऊंगा, यही ख्वाहिश थी वीरों की जब वो गए थे कारगिल. कुछ करो देश के लिए, बस यही है मेरी अपील। कुछ करो देश के
वाह,
लिए, बस यही है
क्या बात है।
अपील। और 2 लाइन सी कोस्टर के लिए है। हर सी कोस्टर में जोश है, लोगों की सेवा में मदहोश है। हर सी कोस्टर में जोश है, लोगों की सेवा में मदहोश है। करेंगे इस साल कुछ कम नहीं, कोई कह नहीं पाएगा कि बम नहीं। थैंक यू वेरी मच सुधीर।
Thank you, Jayanti. Now I would request Kevin, Rotarian Kevin Shah for vote of thanks.
There are some announcements.
Yeah, okay, secretarial announcements. Do you have any things to make?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rotarian Sudhir. There are some day and anniversary announcements till the 12th of August. We have Rotarian Ashok Chandrawalkar, Director, who celebrated his birthday on the 1st of August. And Geeta Mochala, a lady with the golden, giving a lot to the society, celebrated her birthday on the 1st of August as well. Then we have Rotarian and Renu, who celebrated their marriage anniversary on the 8th of August. And Yaman Bhai celebrated her birthday on the 8th of August. Then we had Rotarian Vipin Reshamia Ji, music wizard of Seacoast, who celebrated his birthday yesterday on the 11th of August. Rotarian Narendra Amriwala celebrates his birthday today. And Rotarian Ajay Nagpal, who's the husband of Rotarian Sarika Nagpal, celebrates his birthday today on the 12th of August. So let's give a big hand. And coming to the meetings of this one, the second meeting is due on the 26th of August, that is a Thursday. Our COVID times over as yet. When will we start offline meetings at club? Into the heart, everyone is anxious to hear the reality, truth, and the actual situation. Listen to all this from an expert and a well-known COVID specialist, Om Srivastava. He'll be our next speaker on the 26th of August. And I would request all members to take active participation in all which are going on. Please get in touch with Rotarian Kunal Kapadia to get involved on the projects which are going on, the breast milk pump machines, the kangaroo bags, computer education center at Sharma Akali. Thank you very much, Sudhir, and thank you very much all the members. May I request Rotarian Kevin Shah to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lalitji. You have passed on the baton to me, so thank you for that, and also for the wonderful song that you sang to honor our soldiers. I would also like to extend that same thanks to Vijay Mirchandani, who did the same. Vijay actually is also known to be a very large-hearted guy as far as the army is concerned. He's Pulwama martyr, one of the martyrs. He has given to his family a 2 BHK flat, in case you guys don't know. And he also got a street in Bhopal renamed as the Heroes Avenue, where he has planted 1 tree for each of the martyrs with the help of the CPRF guys. I would also like to recognize Jayanti Parmar for his Char Line. Thank you for that. And Avinash Dattaji for bringing in such an eminent person. So thank you for that as well. And now, last but not least, Lieutenant General Mohinder Puri ji. It was a brilliant session. It brought us to those hills, to those mountains a bit closer. This was the first war which has been televised, and therefore we all were there, and we were in a living room watching it. But then there were these finer nuances which we missed, and you brought out, and we actually could feel even more of the valor that has gone through, the hard work which has gone through, and fighting in those steep terrain. The topography was not very friendly. I would like to say that while it was customary for me to say thanks to you, but the country can never thank enough for the big great work that our army men are doing. We sleep like babies in the night, and we go about doing a business during the day. It's because army folks like you who keep the vigil round the clock. I would like to offer you something today, sir. When someone asked you the question if this was an intelligence failure, very candidly you said that yeah, there was an intelligence failure. It's known. I think this speaks about the frankness and the candor speaks about the depth of our army, where we are open to be vulnerable, investigate, and improve. But while you may do that, sir, while you may do that, I would like to say that it was actually not so much of an intelligence failure from our side. I would like to say that it was a stupidity side, because the intelligence was missing on the other side. The only people who knew of this silly attack was a couple of guys, but their prime minister was in the absence. The Air Force didn't know about it. Their Navy didn't know about it. The president didn't know about it. He was supposed to be the head of the armed forces. So I think that you could cut a little of slack today, and you live in our hearts, and we will always be grateful to you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
everybody.
Just one second. Thank you very much, Mohinder. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
All the very best.
Jai Hind and good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, everyone. Good night.
Hi, Sudhir.
Hi, who's this?
Satish Kazi.
Oh, hello, Satish. How are you?
Salute.
Arey,
Is Ranjit there?
Ranjit, nahi, I don't think I see him. I'll check.
Must have left.
Yeah.
Must have left. Went off very well. Avi went off very well.
Thanks, thanks, Avi.
Yeah,
Thanks very
General
much.
spoke
Hi,
so
Ashok.
well.
Hi, Satish.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks, Ashok Kothari, for inviting me. Thank you.
Welcome,
Welcome, welcome. Our programs are always most welcome. Satish bhai, you are a part of the old gang.
Thank you. Thank you.
अभी मेरे को
Happy
ये
birthday, Vipin ji.
I am a past president of Midwest Club.
yeah, correct, absolutely.
Nice meeting you all. All the best. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Hi,
night.
Ashok.
Hello, Ashok.